Hi, I'm Alaris. I came home after 28 months overseas, only to be told I was dead, legally erased. My father looked me straight in the eye and said, "You don't exist here. Never did." And just like that, they took everything. My name, my place, the $68 million company my grandfather left to me. They called it the price for leaving. But they forgot one thing. Dead girls don't come back. I did. Before we dive in, what time are you listening and where from? Drop it in the comments. We'd love to know. Now, let me tell you what really happened. The air in Fresno felt heavier than I remembered. It wasn't the weather. It was something else. Maybe it was the fact that I hadn't set foot on this soil in over 2 years. 28 months to be exact. I'd landed just before noon, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and a manila envelope of discharge papers clutched tightly under my arm. No banners, no hugs, no one waiting at the gate. Just me, trying to reconnect with a life I thought I still had. I didn't go home right away. I needed to breathe, needed to think. So I took a bus from the airport to a small shopping strip off Cedar Avenue and walked into the familiar branch of West Point Federal, the same bank where I'd opened my first savings account when I was 15. The teller, a younger woman with bubblegum pink nails, scanned my ID, typed something, and then paused. Her cheerful expression shifted, like a curtain dropping mid-play. She called over a manager. He arrived with the usual stiff smile of someone trained in corporate sympathy. "Ma'am," he said slowly, glancing down at his screen, then back up at me. "This account is no longer active. It was closed nearly 19 months ago." I frowned. "That's impossible. I've been deployed. I'm active military. I just got back." His eyes flicked to my uniform jacket, then to the ID in my hand. "We have a note here that it was closed after a legal death certificate was processed." I laughed. Actually laughed. "What? I'm standing right here." "Yes, ma'am. I can see that. But I'm afraid we can't take action here. You'll need to contact the probate court." I leaned in, lowering my voice. "Someone filed a death certificate? For me?" "I'm sorry, ma'am. I really am." I stepped back slowly, like I was trying not to trip over a landmine. My fingers tightened around the strap of my bag. Dead? They declared me dead? My mind was spinning. I wasn't angry yet. I was too stunned for that. Numbness tends to come first. The emotions, they wait their turn. Outside, the sun beat down on the sidewalk. I stood for a moment under the shadow of the bank's awning before turning toward the road. There weren't any buses for another hour, so I did what I'd always done when I needed to calm down. I walked. 2 miles, past the corner diner where I had my first date, past the high school football field, now empty and sun-scorched. My boots thudded against the pavement with a rhythm that helped my thoughts settle. I reached my parents' house, a 2-story ranch style in a cul-de-sac full of neatly trimmed lawns and American flags, but it didn't look like the home I remembered. The shutters were painted a sharp gray now. The old oak tree Dad refused to cut down was gone. Even the front door had been replaced. I stood there for a moment, heart hammering. Then I raised my hand and knocked. Once. Twice. The kind of knock you do when you're not sure what's on the other side. The door creaked open and my father appeared. Same build, a little more gray at the temples, but something was off. His eyes scanned me slowly. Not the way a father sees his daughter after 2 years apart, but like he was looking at a stranger who might be trying to sell him something. "Dad?" My voice cracked. He didn't answer right away. Just stared. "I just got back," I said, searching his face for something, anything. "You don't exist here," he said finally. "Never did." Then he shut the door. Quietly, deliberately. No slamming. Just final. I didn't knock again. I walked down the front steps, my boots now scuffed with dirt and shame. I sat on the curb, watching the lights spill out of the windows I used to call home. And I remembered a letter. Grandpa James had handed it to me the night before my deployment. We were sitting in the garage, 2 folding chairs between old boxes and tools he never got around to using. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Legacy means you never quit. And you protect what's yours, with dignity. I'd tucked that note into the side pocket of my backpack where it stayed through sandstorms, missed holidays, and a roadside bombing that almost shattered my right leg. I pulled it out now. The ink had faded, the fold lines were permanent, but the words were still there. Legacy, dignity. The next morning, I stood outside the Fresno County Courthouse, unsure whether to scream or collapse. I chose neither. I walked inside, straight-backed and calm, like I was preparing for a mission briefing. The woman at the probate office gave me the kind of look people reserve for hospital waiting rooms, equal parts sympathy and confusion. "I need to check on a probate filing," I said, "for someone who's very much alive." She asked for a name, date of birth. I gave her everything. She typed, clicked, paused. "It says, here you were declared deceased. Filed by Gerald Quinn and Michael Quinn. That's your father and brother?" I nodded slowly. "What proof did they submit?" "A report from the Department of Defense stating MIA status after an explosion in Al Anbar. We received it with your deployment details and certificate. That report was never confirmed," I said, stunned. "I was missing for 2 days, not dead." "Well, legally they declared you deceased after the required period. Your share of the Quinn & Sons firm was passed on through intestate succession. Nothing was left in your name." I leaned on the counter, my voice low and shaking. "So what now?" She tilted her head with a practiced sigh. "Now? You'll have to prove you're alive, with affidavits, legal proceedings, possibly litigation, but right now, legally speaking, you don't exist." I looked at her. They didn't just erase me. They buried me alive. The next morning, I stood outside a rusted chain-link gate about 5 miles outside Fresno. The air was already warming, even though the sun had barely lifted above the almond groves. I hadn't slept much. How could I? My name had been stripped from the world like it meant nothing. But the military trained me for disorientation, and if I'd learned anything in survival training, it was this. When you're lost, you go back to your last known point. That last known point for me was a forgotten row of tan metal storage units off an old county road. Unit number 112 had been mine since I was 22, right after Grandpa told me, "Always keep a copy of your legacy in your own hands." I'd paid for it out of my enlistment bonus. Small, cheap, easy to forget. Apparently, they had. I slid the spare key from the false bottom of my duffel and unlocked the door. The hinges groaned like they hadn't been used in years. Inside, the space smelled like old paper and California dust. Boxes were stacked in lopsided rows, some half-collapsed from moisture. My name was scribbled on the sides in Sharpie, my own handwriting. One box simply read, "Grandpa, Private Trust." I knelt down and opened it. Inside was a metal tin, locked with one of those cheap suitcase latches. I popped it open with a flathead key I'd kept on my dog tag chain. I had no expectations. Maybe photos, maybe a few old receipts. What I didn't expect was a notarized letter in Grandpa's bold cursive. Dated 6 weeks before my last deployment. The seal was real. The notary's signature was crisp. And the first line read, "I, Everett Quinn, do hereby name my granddaughter Alaris Quinn, the sole successor to all controlling shares and executive powers of Quinn Systems Incorporated, effective upon my passing." I didn't breathe for a full 10 seconds. Below it were company bylaws, original stock certificates, dated back over 20 years, and most shocking of all, a power of attorney form Grandpa had pre-signed. The section for submission and witness signatures was blank. He must have planned to have it finalized, but never got the chance. There was also a thumb drive. Taped to it was a note, "Read this only if betrayed." I stared at it for a moment, heart hammering. Then I pulled my old military laptop from the duffel. No Wi-Fi, no cloud, just local access. I wasn't taking chances. The drive booted fast. A folder appeared. To Alaris. Inside were 3 files. One was a video. I clicked play. Grandpa's face filled the screen, older, thinner than I remembered, but his eyes were just as sharp. He was sitting in his study, the one they remodeled into a modern lounge after he passed. His voice was steady. "If you're watching this," he said, "then I was right. Your father and brother, they're not to be trusted with the company. They never earned it. They cut corners, hid numbers, lied to the board, and they think because you wear a uniform, you don't understand business, but I've watched you. You've got grit, you've got judgment, and you've got integrity." He paused, then looked directly into the camera. "If they ever try to erase you, remember, you've got every right to claim what's yours, and you've got proof." I swallowed hard. The second file was a PDF titled Audit Trail. I opened it. Bank statements, transfers, personal withdrawals from company accounts in amounts just low enough to avoid automatic reporting, all signed off by my father or my brother, Lane. There were even emails between them discussing how to handle things if Grandpa passed before formalizing the transition. Then I found the file date, just 3 weeks before I was listed as missing in action. And that's when the full picture started to take shape. They hadn't declared me dead in confusion. They waited. Waited until Grandpa passed, until the power shifted, until the shares were up for claim. And then they made sure I couldn't claim them. I sat back against the cold metal wall of the unit, eyes closed, laptop on my knees. The documents weren't just evidence. They were a roadmap of betrayal. This wasn't about misunderstanding. This was strategic erasure. It was theft, dressed up in grief. A crow called somewhere outside. The sun had risen fully now, lighting the edges of the storage unit through gaps in the door. I looked around at the boxes stacked in the corner, the last remnants of a life they tried to delete. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From clarity. I wasn't dead, I wasn't gone. I wasn't some forgotten soldier in a frame. I was here, and I had every receipt. The final file on the USB was a spreadsheet. My name, Grandpa's holdings, and a breakdown of voting rights if I were to present the original certificates alongside the notarized letter. They thought I was gone. They thought I'd never come back. They buried me, but forgot I was trained to survive behind enemy lines. The next morning, I stood in front of the corporate headquarters of Quinn Systems, Inc., the same building my grandfather built from the ground up. The place where I'd spent weekends as a kid, tracing blueprints on the floor of his office while he sipped black coffee and told me that real legacy wasn't passed down. It was protected. Now it towered before me in cold steel and glass, sterile and self-satisfied, as if it didn't once belong to a man who signed every Christmas bonus by hand. I didn't bother with disguise or subtlety. I wore my uniform, not to intimidate, but to remind them I hadn't vanished, that I'd served while they stole. The security doors parted with a soft hiss. I stepped into the marble lobby, my boots echoing across polished stone. At the front desk, the young receptionist looked up from her monitor, froze, and went slack-jawed. "You," she stammered, "you're supposed to be dead?" I offered, folding my hands on the counter. "I get that a lot lately." She blinked, then reached shakily for the phone. "I wouldn't," I said evenly, sliding my government-issued ID across the desk. "I'm here to access a private executive office. You can either cooperate or explain to the Department of Justice why you obstructed a federal witness investigating the illegal seizure of inherited corporate assets." Her hand paused midair. Color drained from her face. The name did its job. 2 security guards appeared within seconds, but they didn't move closer, just hovered, uncertain. "You can call legal," I continued, "or you can escort me upstairs. I'll wait either way." The elevator chimed softly as the doors opened. I stepped in alone, turned and locked eyes with them just before the doors slid shut. "4th floor," I muttered, as if the building hadn't once felt like home. The ride up felt longer than I remembered. A thin hum filled the air, and with every passing second, I prepared myself, not for a fight, but for the stillness I'd need to hold. When the elevator opened, I was greeted by a familiar hallway, gray carpeting, walnut trim. The boardroom was still at the far end, its double doors now frosted with a modern logo. I pushed through without knocking. The room silenced immediately. There were at least a dozen people around the table, my father seated at the head, gesturing mid-sentence, Lane on his left, scribbling something on a notepad. My mother at the far end, in a navy pantsuit and pearls she only wore on public days. For a moment, they didn't react, as if their brains couldn't process the outline of me standing there. Lane was the first to move. He dropped his pen. Literally dropped it, like it burned him. My mother gasped and covered her mouth, eyes wide, but my father— Robert didn't flinch. He sat back slowly, folded his hands, and studied me like I was a problem that had come back to life. "You don't belong here," he said, flat, dismissive. I took a breath, stepped forward, and placed the tin box and the thumb drive in front of him. "Then explain this," I said calmly. The board members looked at each other. One cleared his throat, but no one spoke. I reached across the table, retrieved the drive, and slid it into the room's projector port. The lights dimmed slightly, the screen flickered. Then his voice filled the room. "If you're hearing this, it means Alaris is being erased." Somebody inhaled sharply near the end of the table. My grandfather's face appeared on the screen, eyes serious but kind, just as I remembered. He spoke directly, plainly, the way he always did when something mattered. He spoke about me, about his distrust in Robert and Lane, about the financial discrepancies he'd discovered, about the way I handled pressure, and why the company, his company, belonged in the hands of someone who didn't see it as a birthright, but as a responsibility. "Trust only the papers in her possession," he said, "and if they've taken her name off the books, they've taken more than that." The video ended. Silence took its place. For a few long seconds, no one moved. Then one of the board members, Hal Breckman, I think, shifted in his seat, glancing nervously at the others. My father stood slowly, adjusted his cufflinks, and spoke like he was addressing a minor legal inconvenience. "This isn't valid," he said coldly. "She left. She abandoned the family, abandoned her post, her obligations. This," he gestured at the projector, "is irrelevant." Lane leaned toward the lawyer seated next to him, whispering fast and low. My mother still hadn't spoken. I looked straight at Robert. "You called it the price for leaving? Here's the price for lying." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. That's when the boardroom door opened again. A tall man in a dark blazer stepped in, silver badge clipped at his belt. He walked with quiet authority, scanning the room once before nodding at me. "Ms. Quinn," he said. "Good timing." He turned to Lane and extended a sealed envelope. "Lane Quinn, you've been served." Lane went pale, his hand trembling as he took the document. His lips moved, but no sound came out. The U.S. Marshal turned back to me. "We'll be in touch shortly." And just like that, the entire temperature of the room dropped by 10 degrees. Even Robert lost his color. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply stood there as their castle of silence began to crack. They wanted me gone so badly, they erased me on paper. But paper burns. And the truth? It's fireproof. The door had barely closed behind the marshal before I walked out. My boots hit the marble like a ticking clock, loud, deliberate, final. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. Lane's eyes had already said it all. Outside, the California heat hit like a wall, but I barely noticed. I moved through it like I had back in Kandahar, on a mission, focused, numb to everything but the objective. By noon, I was in a sterile downtown office across from the Fresno courthouse. The blinds were half drawn, the hum of an aging HVAC unit barely covering the silence between me and the man sitting across from me. Oliver Chow, forensic accountant, hired through an old DOJ contact. Meticulous, unflinching. He pulled out a tablet and tapped a few times. "I cross-referenced the routing codes against the Cayman disclosures," he said, not looking up. "Your name never appears, but these do." He spun the screen toward me. Robert Quinn. Lane Quinn. 2 offshore holding structures, and then timelines. 72 hours after your presumed death, he said quietly. 12.4 million in assets began moving. Mostly stock sales, trust redemptions, retirement liquidations, into the Cayman branches, then swept through shell corporations. I stared at the flowchart. Arrows, numbers, accounts. It looked like a blueprint for a burial, a digital grave. This wasn't just greed, I said, voice low, jaw tight. This was a cover-up. Oliver hesitated. It's clean work, probably planned months in advance. I nodded. That part I already knew. I leaned back in the chair and exhaled slowly through my nose. There was no outburst, no curse, no yelling, just one clear, quiet thought. They needed me gone. So they erased me, on paper, in life, in blood. I thanked him, gathered the printed sheets, and stepped back into the blinding sunlight. My boots felt heavier now. I didn't go home. Not yet. Instead, I found myself tucked into a corner booth at a quiet cafe 2 blocks over. The kind with chipped mugs and old soul records playing too softly. I was halfway through a bitter cup of black coffee when she approached, slowly, carefully. She looked like someone's grandmother, white curls tucked under a hat, hands trembling ever so slightly. Her name tag, faded and pinned to an old cardigan, read Margot. "Alaris?" she asked, voice warm but cautious. I sat up a little straighter. "Yes? I knew your grandfather. I was with him during the final days. I didn't expect to run into you, but I saw your name in the paper yesterday." She reached into her tote and pulled out a letter, sealed, yellowed edges, my name in familiar, looping handwriting. "I was told to give this to you if you ever made it back." I took it with both hands. For a second I couldn't breathe. She didn't linger, just patted my arm gently and said, "He spoke of you often, said the others, lost their way, but not you." Then she walked out, slow and quiet, like a spirit returning to whatever realm it came from. I waited until I got back to my car before opening the envelope. My hands shook. Inside, 1 page, folded twice, no salutation, just a sentence in bold at the top. "If you're reading this, they've done what I feared." The letter went on to describe the rot inside the company, the secrets, the lies, the betrayal he suspected but couldn't prove in time. He apologized for not protecting me, for trusting the wrong people. And then, in the last line, "You are my legacy, not them." I read it again, and again, until the words blurred, then snapped back into focus. I folded it carefully and tucked it into the inside pocket of my jacket, close to my heart. That letter became something I didn't know I needed, an anchor. By dusk, I was driving up the winding road to the family estate. The place looked the same, too pristine, too quiet, as if truth had never dared to live here. Mom answered the door in a silk robe, hair done, martini in hand. Her face froze the second she saw me. I didn't wait. "I need to talk." She stepped aside like she was letting in a neighbor, not a daughter she hadn't seen in 3 years. I followed her into the sitting room. The furniture hadn't moved an inch. I stayed standing. She took a sip. "You look tired." I was declared dead. That takes a toll. Her lips twitched. I didn't know what to believe. "Did you ever ask?" She set the glass down. "You should have never gone to war. It changed you." "No," I said, my voice steady. "You changed, or maybe you always were this way and I just didn't want to see it." Her eyes hardened. "You abandoned us, Alaris. You left, and now you come back, demanding things like some—" "I'm not demanding," I cut in. "I'm reclaiming." She scoffed. "You don't have a place here anymore." I almost laughed. The absurdity of her defiance after everything was dizzying. I didn't answer. I walked out without another word. The next morning, I drove to the county clerk's office to double-check what I already suspected. The official copy of my grandfather's will was missing. "Must have been an error," the young clerk mumbled, scrolling through the registry. "We show that document was never certified." "That's not true," I replied calmly. "I signed the certification paperwork myself the week before his stroke." He blinked. "I can escalate it to legal, but if there's no file—" There was no need to argue. Not yet. I took his name and left. Something told me someone had been paid off. Maybe more than one someone. I returned to the motel I was staying at, not the family home. Never again that place. The parking lot was quiet, sun low on the horizon. I could already feel the evening chill creeping in. The envelope was waiting in front of my door. No return address, just my name. Handwritten. I looked around. No cars pulling away, no footsteps running. Inside my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. Inside, a photo. Lane, shaking hands with the county clerk. And beneath it, the unredacted version of the will. With one line bolded and underlined in red ink, all shares and voting rights pass solely to Alaris Quinn upon my death, regardless of military status, residency, or family objection. I stared at it, and for the first time in a long while, I smiled. Inside the envelope was the unredacted will and a photo of Lane shaking hands with the county clerk. I didn't flinch. I folded the photo, tucked it into my jacket pocket, and leaned back against the vinyl headboard of the motel bed. There was no need to scream. No need to call anyone. The fire was already lit. At 6:07 the next morning, I walked across the gravel lot, past a breakfast joint still putting out folding signs, and into the office of a mid-tier investigative journalist named Glenn Forster. I'd found him through a veterans forum. He had a history of pushing small stories that sometimes exploded into headlines. I didn't give him my name, just the file. Glenn scanned the contents with tired, baggy eyes. "You're saying this woman was legally declared dead and someone moved $68 million out of her name?" "I'm saying someone erased her while she was still breathing," I replied, "and I have more if you're interested." He didn't say yes. He didn't need to. He just reached for his mug, nodded once and said, "Come back tomorrow. Morning edition hits the street at 5. I left without looking back. By noon, my phone buzzed off the counter. The headline was short but sharp. "War vet declared dead, now says 68 Meddlers Company was stolen." First, the story floated under the radar, buried between small-town politics and car crashes, but by 1:30 p.m. it had been reposted in a private Facebook group for female veterans. By 3 p.m., it was pinned on 3 subreddits. At 5:42 p.m., a woman from Ohio messaged the newspaper's tip line, "This happened to my cousin. Different state, same game." I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I sat in the kitchen of my rented trailer and watched the flame of the gas stove flicker beneath a dented kettle. My silence was strategic, because by 6:15 p.m., they responded. Lane stood on a makeshift podium outside the corporate building our grandfather built from nothing. Cameras flashed as he leaned into the mic, jaw tight, hair trimmed perfect. "I'm deeply saddened," he began, "by the cruel impersonation of someone we all buried in grief. Whoever this woman is, she's not my sister. My real sister served her country, yes, but she was never well again after. We did our best." He paused just enough to pretend emotion, then added, "This is nothing more than an attempt to exploit our father's name and our family's trust, and frankly, it's disgraceful." Then she appeared. My mother, draped in a dark wool coat I recognized from years ago. Her makeup was impeccable. She stepped up beside him like some grieving widow and nodded as Lane spoke. When a reporter asked her how she felt about the story, she simply said, "I wish people respected the dead. We've suffered enough." I didn't turn off the TV. I just stood there, fists pressed to my sides, the skin along my spine prickling. I whispered aloud, to no one, "Let them talk. Let them bury themselves." That night, the wind howled harder than usual, rattling the thin windows of the trailer. I was wrapping up notes when I heard a car door slam. Then another. Someone knocked. It wasn't urgent, but it wasn't casual either. I opened the door to find Romy standing there, arms wrapped around her chest, face pale in the porch light. I didn't say a word, just stepped aside. Inside, she sat down stiffly at the corner of my table, eyes darting around like she wasn't sure if the trailer had ears. "I shouldn't be here," she said. "If Lane finds out—" I raised an eyebrow but stayed quiet. She exhaled. "I thought you were dead. I mean, that's what they told us, but then I saw the news, and—" Her voice broke. "I didn't know. I swear. But I went through our finances after your story went up. There was a deposit from one of those Cayman accounts into our kids' college fund. Then it disappeared. She slid a flash drive across the table. I recorded them, Lane and Robert. I had a hunch months ago, so I planted a mic in the den. I figured maybe they were hiding some tax stuff, not... Her hands shook as she tried to explain. I picked up the flash drive gently. Why now, Romy? Her voice came quieter than I'd expected. Because I looked my son in the eye last week, and I couldn't lie anymore. I leaned forward. You're not doing this for me. She met my gaze. I'm not. I'm doing it for myself, and for him. She stood before I could respond. I won't help you again, she said, already at the door. Don't call, don't text. Then she was gone. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I brewed stale coffee, opened my laptop, and started building a case. Not for inheritance. Not yet. That fight would come later. First, I needed something simpler, sharper, identity. The flash drive held more than enough to begin. Their voices were clear, their words specific. Once the paperwork's in, she's gone. Dead on paper. Assets liquidated. No next of kin listed. Robert's voice. Then Lane's. She signed up for the military. That's a choice. We made a choice too. I submitted a civil complaint for fraud and identity theft by 10:30 a.m. By noon, I was standing before a clerk at Fresno's civil courthouse, hand steady. At 2:00 p.m., I entered a quiet chamber with a judge who looked like he'd seen 1,000 stories in the span of one career. I presented the flash drive, the photo, the headline, the email from the VA confirming I had never signed any death notification. I didn't cry, I didn't plead, I just told the truth. The judge tapped his pen on the desk, then finally looked up, eyes steady. If what you say is true, Ms. Quinn, this changes everything. The judge's pen dropped with a quiet clack onto his desk, but the sound echoed in my chest like a gavel. He leaned forward slightly and said the words I'd waited half a lifetime to hear. Temporary injunction granted. All board activity at Quintech is frozen until further notice. I nodded once, folded the copy of the order into my bag, and walked out of that courtroom with no victory smile, no tears, just a weight shifting from one shoulder to the other. Outside, the heat was already settling in over Fresno, clinging to my skin like tension that wouldn't wash off. I stepped off the courthouse steps, blinked into the morning sun, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I didn't go home. I didn't even turn my phone on. Instead, I walked the 6 blocks to a legal aid center that had been a rundown medical office last time I'd passed by. Inside, it smelled like coffee gone stale and overused toner, but a tall woman with sharp cheekbones and a marine pin on her jacket greeted me with a firm handshake. "Heard your story," she said, offering me a seat. "I'm Regina, former JAG. You need someone who doesn't flinch when family turns legal." We got to work. Over the next few days, Regina and I combed through every page Romy had given me. The flash drive wasn't just a recording, it had spreadsheets, emails, even a ledger marked Petra A that turned out to be a shell account. Romy hadn't just handed me evidence. She'd given me the rope they used to tie the noose around themselves. We filed a formal motion to unseal Quintech's internal financials. Regina moved fast, filing under whistleblower protections, citing executive abuse and hidden assets. She was surgical, precise. 3 days later, the Fresno Times ran the front-page headline, "Veteran returns to challenge fortune built on her death." Suddenly, everyone cared. Veteran support groups flooded my inbox. Anonymous tips poured in. A former Quintech employee forwarded an internal memo suggesting my name had been retired for legal clarity. The words felt like acid. Retired. Like I was a product they didn't need anymore. Back at the trailer, I propped my laptop on a stack of law books and clicked into the email from Regina. The scanned documents glowed on my screen. Rows and rows of transactions, nearly $12 million siphoned into 3 shadow companies with no employees, no offices. One was registered to a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. Like everything I knew had been disassembled and placed neatly in front of me, ugly truths sorted into color-coded folders. Around midnight, a soft knock rapped on the metal door. I startled, pulling my robe tighter as I peeked out. It was Romy. Her hair was unbrushed, shoulders tense, mascara smudged like she hadn't slept. I opened the door without a word. She stepped inside and sat down before I could even offer water. "They cut me off," she whispered. I sat across from her. "What do you mean?" "My parents, Lane, even his mother. They said I betrayed the family." Her voice cracked. She stared at the floor like it might give her the answers she'd never gotten from her husband. "I didn't know," she continued, voice trembling. "At first, I thought it was just a business thing, some trust restructuring. But then, I saw our son's college fund vanish, moved to something called Saltron Holdings." My breath caught. That was one of the names on the shell documents. "They used my son," she said, "to hide money. I don't know how to forgive that. I don't even want to." I reached for the flash drive she had given me days ago. "What you did, Romy, it matters." She looked up, tears clinging to her lashes. "I didn't do it for you." I nodded. "I did it for me," she said, "so I could live with the woman I see in the mirror, so my son wouldn't grow up thinking silence was strength." When she left, I watched her walk to her car. She looked lighter, no victory, just the kind of clarity that comes after a long scream no one hears. The next morning, Regina called. "Time to put a face to the fight," she said. Through legal channels, we filed a motion demanding my inclusion in the next Quintech board meeting, virtual attendance as a verified stakeholder. The hearing was quiet. No objections. Just a judge who looked me in the eye and said, "Ms. Quinn, let's bring the past into the light." A week later, I was logged in early. My laptop camera framed just enough of me. Steady eyes, hair tied back, plain shirt, no jewelry. The Quintech board call went live at 9 a.m. sharp. 8 small screens flickered to life. Familiar names, less familiar faces. Some looked older, some untouched. Lane's square popped up last. Robert sat beside him. When the chairperson called roll, I clicked unmute. "This is Alaris Quinn," I said. 3 people audibly gasped. One man coughed, muted himself. Lane blinked and leaned forward like he couldn't believe his own eyes. "You said I was dead," I said, voice steady. "You buried my name, my identity, my legacy. Let's talk about why." I clicked share screen. Slide 1, a photo of me in uniform returning from Kabul. Slide 2, the forged signature on a legal release form. Slide 3, a routing number linking a Quintech account to Saltron Holdings. I didn't pause for questions. I didn't invite comments. "Here," I said, moving to the next slide, "is the audio file you might want to hear. Lane and Robert discussing why I had to be written out." I pressed play. The room stayed silent as Lane's voice echoed through the call. "She left. Dad said she made her choice. She wasn't one of us anymore." Then Robert's voice, sharper, impatient. "Yeah, but we didn't have to erase her. That was Dad's call. He said if she ever came back, she'd have nothing." I stopped the audio. The board chair leaned in, face drawn. "Ms. Quinn," he said slowly, "I believe this board owes you more than an apology." I didn't smile. Not yet. There was more they needed to see. After the board meeting, I didn't go home. I didn't even take a breath. I went straight to the county records building, one of those squat brick structures built before air conditioning was invented. The air inside was stale, thick with decades of dust and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights that flickered with every gust from the vent. I signed in with a ballpoint pen chained to the front desk. The clerk barely looked up from her phone. "I'm looking for probate filings tied to Harold Quinn's estate," I said. She blinked, then squinted at the calendar on the wall like that would help her recall anything. "That's going to be a box pull from archives. You got a docket number?" "No," I said, keeping my voice calm, "but I do have this." I slid over a folder, court-approved injunction, my veteran military ID, birth certificate, and the original will they'd filed before I disappeared from their lives. The clerk looked down at the papers, then up at me. Something shifted in her expression. Maybe doubt, maybe respect. She picked up the phone. It took over an hour. I waited on a metal bench near the back, sipping bitter coffee from a vending machine and ignoring the glances from other people who'd come in for marriage licenses or zoning maps. When they finally rolled out a cart with 3 weathered boxes, I stood. The file I needed wasn't in the first or second. The third one had an envelope, brittle from time, marked Amendment to Will, HQ. It was sealed in plastic, the kind they use for records too important to touch directly. I stared at the date on the top corner, 1 month before my grandfather died. Inside was a single handwritten page, slightly yellowed but intact. I leaned closer. In the event of my death, I entrust full controlling shares of Quintech to my granddaughter, Alaris Quinn, regardless of current residence, deployment status, or any future estrangement imposed by family. She is, and always will be, my named successor. Signed, witnessed, notarized. The clerk leaned over my shoulder. Is that official? Very, I whispered. I took a step back, heart pounding against my ribs. Not from fear, but from something colder. Confirmation. Not only had they lied, they knew. They'd known all along. I picked up the codicil carefully and placed it back into its protective sleeve. I want a certified copy. Today. The woman behind the desk just nodded. You'll get it in 30 minutes. While I waited, I walked outside to the parking lot. The air was dry and still. I leaned against a concrete pillar, letting the sun hit my face for the first time in hours. My hands were shaking. I could feel the memory pushing up from somewhere deep, like a wellspring that had been sealed too long. It was the last time I saw him, my grandfather, the night before I left for basic. He'd come over late, after my parents had already gone to bed. We sat on the back porch, just the two of us, and a glass of sweet tea between us. He didn't say much at first, just watched the stars. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his old wristwatch, silver, worn down around the edges, the leather cracked. Things will get loud after I'm gone, he said, his voice gravelly. They'll fight for what they want. Money, land, name. Don't let them bury yours. I looked at him, confused. What do you mean? He placed the watch in my hand. You carry it now? I didn't understand then, but standing there in the sunlight, that memory wrapped around me like armor. He knew. He knew what they would do to me, and he tried to leave me a way back. When I returned inside, the certified copy was waiting. I didn't go home. Instead, I called Mr. Kellerman, the veteran lawyer who'd been helping me pro bono. You're not going to believe what I found, I said. By the time I explained everything, he'd gone silent. Fraud isn't even the half of it, he finally said. This codicil was hidden. That's obstruction. Conspiracy to defraud a federal beneficiary. You're not just taking back your seat. You could own every inch of what they've stolen. I exhaled slowly. Then let's start the war. He chuckled. You already did, but this time they're the ones cornered. We agreed to file the codicil with the pending case, first thing in the morning. I stepped out of the building into the late afternoon light, my fingers still curled tightly around the envelope like it might vanish if I loosened my grip. The parking lot was quiet. Too quiet. Then I heard it. A low hum. Tires over gravel. I turned slowly. A black SUV crept into view, windows tinted. It eased into the lane near the exit and then stopped directly in front of me. The driver's window rolled down. My father. His hair was grayer now, neatly combed like always. Same crisp shirt, same cold eyes. He didn't speak at first. Then he leaned forward, resting one arm on the doorframe. Get in, he said quietly. We need to talk, before you do something stupid. He didn't look at me right away. Just let the window slide down like it weighed 100 pounds. The SUV's interior was dim, but I could still make out the stubborn line in his jaw. Get in. We need to talk, before you do something stupid. I didn't hesitate. I walked around the car, opened the door, and slid into the passenger seat without a word. He didn't offer a greeting. No hello. No, How have you been? Just started driving like we were going to a funeral neither of us wanted to attend. We didn't speak for 10 full minutes. The hum of the engine was louder than necessary, and the silence between us, it had weight. Like old wallpaper peeling away, still hanging, but useless. He pulled into the lot of a family-style diner on the edge of town, the kind of place that hadn't changed its menu or decor since the 80s. Vinyl booths, wood paneling, the scent of fried food and decaf clinging to the air. We sat in a corner booth away from the windows. The server brought coffee without asking and disappeared like she knew better. Dad leaned back, arms folded, finally looked at me. You were never supposed to come back. I didn't blink. I reached into my folder and laid the codicil gently on the table. It sat between us like a loaded weapon. His eyes flicked down. The blood drained from his face, but he didn't touch it. You think that changes anything? He asked, voice dry. I didn't answer. He sat up straighter, rubbing his temple like this was giving him a headache. You left. You walked away from all of it. You don't get to come back and pretend like you still belong? Still, I stayed quiet. I held it together after your mother died, he said. The company needed leadership. You weren't here. Your siblings were. You mean the same siblings who forged financial statements and blocked me from the board for 10 years? I asked finally. My voice was calm, like I was discussing someone else's grocery list. He waved a hand, dismissive. We did what we had to. You chose your path. You're the one who walked away. I shook my head. I was deployed. You all knew that. His tone turned bitter. We didn't know if you'd ever come back. You think a company waits forever? No, I said, and finally met his gaze fully. But people do. If they care. His mouth tightened. Your grandfather was losing his mind at the end. That document, he didn't know what he was doing. I almost laughed. That's convenient. Funny how the senile old man still managed to notarize everything correctly, with a lawyer and 2 witnesses. He didn't reply. The waitress came by, but we waved her off. Neither of us had touched our coffee. It was getting cold. I looked at the condensation gathering on the cup and drifted, just for a moment. It was my last birthday before I deployed. I had flown home on a 36-hour pass, still in uniform. Everyone was already seated for dinner. My siblings had glasses of wine, their partners chatting about vacation plans. My father handed out envelopes with travel itineraries, spa weekends, Caribbean cruises, and luxury watches. To me, he gave a small red box with a basic toolkit inside. No note, no card. Fix your own future, he had said, then turned away to toast my sister's new car. Later that night, Grandpa had found me alone in the garage, hunched over my duffel bag, trying to fit the ridiculous toolkit in with my gear. He knelt down beside me, pressed something into my hand, his old watch, scratched, heavy, and still warm from his wrist. They'll never see you coming, he whispered. I hadn't understood what he meant back then. Now I did. I blinked and looked up. My father was watching me, but not saying a word. I slid another set of papers across the table, photocopies of the codicil, my deployment records, and a sealed envelope. What's this? He asked. A letter, I said. From him, dated the day before he died. He didn't open it, just stared like it might explode. This isn't about me coming back, I said. It's about what never changed, about what was always mine, whether you acknowledged it or not. He snorted. You sound just like your mother. I didn't flinch. No, I'm like me, and you're going to watch. That stopped him. For the first time, I saw it. Fear, not panic, not regret. Just a flicker of something he couldn't control anymore. Something slipping. I stood slowly and reached into my pocket. The coffee receipt. I laid it face down in front of him. I paid, I said quietly. He looked confused until he turned it over. Written in simple ink, your NDA expired 3 years ago. His hands trembled just enough for me to see it. He didn't move as I turned and walked out. The sky outside had darkened into a purple-gray haze. I stepped into the parking lot, pulling my coat tight against the breeze. My phone buzzed. A new message flashed on the screen. "Federal investigators want to talk. Are you available tomorrow?" I stared at the message, then back at the window where he still sat. Pale. Frozen. His hands hovered over the codicil, like it burned. I stared at the message, then at the man inside the restaurant, his hands trembling over the codicil. I didn't go back inside. There was nothing left to say. I stepped away from the window, let the door swing closed behind me, and turned toward the darkened parking lot. The next morning, I sat in a government building that smelled like old paper and lemon floor wax. The air was still, unnervingly still, like the breath before a verdict. 3 people sat across from me. A woman in a tailored navy blazer introduced herself as Agent Greer. The man beside her, gray at the temples, tapping a pen against a yellow legal pad, was a federal prosecutor. The third was silent, typing into a laptop with calm efficiency. "We've reviewed your documents, Ms. Quinn," Greer said, "and we've conducted preliminary interviews with state and federal record offices. What we found confirms what you suspected." She slid a folder across the table. My own name stared back at me from 2 death certificates. One listed cause of death as complications due to deployment-related injuries. The other? Presumed deceased, no remains recovered. My deployment wasn't just erased, it had been weaponized. "They filed these to remove you from legal records tied to the company," she continued, "along with forged internal documents from the family firm, signed retroactively, naming your siblings as sole inheritors." My father's signature was right there. So was my brother's, my sister's. Clean strokes in black ink on lies that locked me out of my own life. "They also violated multiple federal protections for active duty personnel," the prosecutor added. "It's not just unethical, it's illegal." He listed the charges like he was reading a grocery list. Conspiracy, inheritance fraud, document forgery, perjury. I didn't flinch. Not because it didn't sting, but because I had already felt every blow before it landed. They'll likely face indictments by month's end. I looked down at my hands. For the first time in years, they weren't trembling. Later that afternoon, I was ushered into a small news studio. No flashing lights or fancy green screens, just a camera, a warm lamp, and a producer who offered me chamomile tea before she clipped a mic to my lapel. The journalist was kind, but sharp. She asked carefully, circling the real story. I didn't say everything. I didn't need to. "Some families build legacies," I said, steady and calm. "Others bury daughters." We kept the details general. No names, no numbers, no accusations. But the footage of me in uniform, speaking softly with eyes that held far too many years behind them, it hit something. The clip spread fast. It was everywhere by nightfall. A week later, I heard the bank clerk who told me I was officially dead had been suspended pending investigation. The woman who'd stared at my license and smirked when it didn't scan. Gone. The silence around my family name was starting to crack. 2 days after that, I met with my attorney. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "The codicil is airtight," she said, sliding a thick legal folder toward me. "Probate court is already moving. The business accounts are frozen until formal redistribution, but the board's been forced to acknowledge your claim. They've asked if you'd consider returning as CEO." I blinked. Not in disbelief, but in final recognition that the game had shifted. "I'm not coming back," I said quietly. "I'm not theirs to reclaim." She nodded. "Then they'll move forward with liquidation unless you appoint a trustee." I did. A veteran support fund, one my grandfather had quietly donated to for over a decade. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I parked beside the cemetery. I hadn't been here since the funeral. The headstone was simple, his full name, the years, and the words he insisted on carving himself. "You build what they won't give you." I knelt beside it, pressing my palm to the cool stone. "I brought something," I whispered. From my coat pocket, I pulled the same toolkit my father had given me at that birthday dinner. years ago with a smirk and the words, "Fix your own future." It had sat untouched in a storage bin for over a decade. Now it lay heavy in my hands, then lighter as I placed it carefully at the base of the grave. "You were right," I murmured. "They never saw me coming." I reached into my bag one more time, pulling out the original codicil, now sealed in a fireproof envelope. I tucked it into the grave vault, locking it shut with a small click that somehow sounded final. Then I sat back, breathing slowly, not for survival, but for peace. I don't know how long I stayed there. The air shifted from warm to cool. Leaves rustled, and a distant engine hummed somewhere beyond the fence. As I stood and turned to leave, my phone buzzed. One message. A name I didn't recognize. Annalise. Underneath, "I served with your mother. I think it's time we talked." I didn't look back at the headstone. I didn't need to. The story wasn't buried there. It lived in me now, burned into bone, sharper than any lie they ever told.